Lemoore Fan by David Smith. Mojave Crossing, Part 5. Arriving back at the campsite, the five of them were ready for lunch. The plan was to make sandwiches, along with other goodies, and take it all to the river to eat. They had two coolers, a large one which held most of their food and stayed at the campsite. The smaller one they carried with them daily. It held bottled water, some food, and various snacks. Now they would pack it with their picnic lunch. Everyone was experienced with the sandwich routine, and they worked it like an assembly line. A butcher board appeared, bread began spreading across it, then mayonnaise, mustard, a variety of lunch meat, a slice of tomato, and some lettuce. These were put together and put into baggies. This was done twice more, which gave them 14 sandwiches. They went horseback riding a lot when they were at home in Granada Hills, and were used to making these sort of picnic lunches. These rides would last from 4 to 6 hours. There were several areas where they would stop to eat lunch and rest the horses. They did this at least once a week. Once the food was ready and inside the cooler, they gathered chairs, inner tubes, and plastic rafts to carry to the river. Kevin and Maggie positioned themselves on each end of the cooler, then stacked 2 blankets, some towels, and a couple of pillows on top. They each grabbed a handle, picked up the cooler, and started walking to the river. The kids carried as much as they could, but still couldn't take everything in one trip. Kevin and Junior would come back for the rest. Riding comfortably in Kevin's back pocket was Mojave Crossing. Kevin and Maggie chose an area close to the water, partly shaded under a tree. They set the cooler on the ground. While Maggie and the girls began setting up their picnic area, Kevin and Junior started walking back to the campsite for the remainder of the chairs, water rafts, and Junior's toys. Kevin turned around and handed the Mojave Crossing book to Maggie. "Hold on to this for me, okay, babe?" "Of course," she replied. Kevin kissed her, then he caught up with Junior. Maggie slipped the book into her back pocket and helped the girls finish spreading the blankets. They gathered a few rocks and placed them on the edge of the blankets to hold them down in case a breeze picked up. Kevin and Junior returned 15 minutes later. They added a couple of chairs and Junior's container of toys to the blanket. Kevin sat in a chair and was handed a sandwich on a paper plate. Maggie put a chair next to him and sat in it with her sandwich. They each began to eat, then they were handed a bottle of water. Junior was also given a sandwich and a Gatorade. Stacy and Trudy were still catering to them. Junior sat on the blanket next to Kevin's chair, then the girls sat in chairs. No one said anything as they ate. As soon as Stacy and Trudy finished eating their sandwiches, they took small plastic containers of potato salad and coleslaw and spooned it onto Kevin, Maggie's, and Junior's plates. Kevin had a second sandwich, and they ate grapes for dessert. The kids knew they had to wait an hour before they went into the water after eating. The girls cleaned up the food, paper plates, and the trash. Junior emptied his container of toys on the sand next to the blanket. They were mostly a variety of cars and trucks. Junior also had a plastic shovel and a pail. He began dragging the shovel in the sand, making roads. The 4 of them sat down with him, and each chose either a truck or a car. They played this same game each time. The roads became a make-believe city. As the area grew, pieces of branches were added for trees, and various sized rocks signified buildings or houses. Then they each drove around with their toy vehicles making car noises. Motors, brakes squealing, and tires skidding. Kevin and Maggie enjoyed playing with the kids. The girls did everything with their little brother and watched over him like mother hens. Junior loved being the center of attention. After an hour, Trudy announced it was time to go into the water. "You guys go ahead," Maggie said. "I'll catch up in a little while. I want to relax and read for a bit." She held up the Mojave Crossing book for them to see. "You're taking this Lemoore reading very seriously," Kevin said. "Yes, it feels good to think of my dad and Tom," Maggie replied. Kevin kissed Maggie, and he and the kids walked to the river with their inflatable toys. Maggie leaned back in her chair and opened the book to page 7. As she read, she watched her family playing in the water off and on. She enjoyed Lemoore's details in describing the horses Tell bought for the black-eyed woman and his own. Maggie enjoyed Western movies. She remembered watching them with her mom and dad, then with her mom and Tom later. Her real dad had taken her horseback riding several times when she was little. Then when her mother had got together with Tom, she and her mother had their own horses. Tom already had one. When she met Kevin, she taught him to ride and introduced him to Westerns. He didn't have any interest before that. He seemed to be uncomfortable at first, since they reminded him of his father and brother. She was very surprised when he showed up with the Lemoore book to read. She continued reading until she was at page 33. She was enjoying the story, but she saw Kevin was alone. The kids were with their new friends, playing closer to shore in shallow water. She grabbed one of the plastic rafts and floated out to Kevin. He was also on the raft, lying on his back with his eyes closed. "You look comfortable, baby," Maggie said. "Yeah," Kevin responded. "This is really nice." Maggie was lying on her stomach on the raft. She parked it next to Kevin's and watched the kids. "The twins are so good with Junior," Kevin said. "They always have been," Maggie responded. "Do you know how much I love you, Kevin Jones?" "Yes, but I love to hear it." He shifted the raft closer to her, put an arm around her and kissed her. "I love you too, baby." "Reading this book, I can't help thinking that my dad and Tom probably read it. It's making me feel happy and sad at the same time," Maggie continued. "I'm thinking about my dad too," Kevin said. "Then of course my brother." Maggie's dad had been killed in a police shootout. 14 months later, her mother had met Tom, but he had also died. He'd been bitten by a rattlesnake while walking in the local mountains. He couldn't get to help in time. Kevin's father and younger brother had been killed by a drunk driver. These were some of the things that had bonded them together. "Reading the book has more meaning than just the story," Maggie shared, and a few tears fell from her eyes. "Don't cry, baby," Kevin comforted her. After a few minutes, she dipped her face in the river and washed her tears away. "Are you okay?" Kevin asked. "Of course. It's just that you make me so happy. You've made all of my dreams come true, and you're still doing it. You're my Prince Charming." I remember Tom having Lemoy's books around all the time. I don't remember them so much with my dad, but my mom has told me he loved them too. "Same with my dad," Kevin responded. "I remember he would tell us about the stories. I don't remember any of the details of them, but he was really happy talking about them." "Here come our children," Maggie said. "Mom, were you crying?" Stacy asked. "Yeah," Maggie answered, "but I'm fine. Your dad makes me cry sometimes." "Why?" "That happens when you're in love," Maggie explained. "That's what you always say." Both girls had paddled over on their plastic rafts. Junior was in an inner tube paddling as well, and right behind him was a young boy on his inner tube. "This is Kevin's friend Matt," Judy said. "They want to play with Kevin's toys." "Where are your friends?" Maggie asked. "They had to go to town," Judy answered. "We might see them later." They all paddled ashore and got off the inflatables. Junior and Matt went straight to the toys and were immediately occupied. Kevin, Maggie, and the girls dried themselves with towels. Stacy opened the cooler. "Anyone want a sandwich?" she offered, taking one for her and Trudy. Kevin and Maggie declined. The boys weren't paying attention. Both girls sat on the blanket to eat. "Why don't we read some more of the book?" Kevin suggests to Maggie. "I'm only on chapter 3. "That's okay," Kevin says. "I don't mind reading it again. Or are you going to read it to me?" "Okay, I'll read a chapter, then you read one." "Let's scoot over where it's quieter," Kevin said, looking at Junior and Matt. He grabbed 2 chairs in one hand and his bottle of water in the other. Maggie had the book in one hand and her bottle of water. They moved about 30 feet away from the kids under a tree. Facing them, Maggie opened the book and began to read out loud. Trudy and Stacy watched them walk away and ate their sandwiches. All the swimming and paddling had given them an appetite. Maggie picked up the story. The bad guys had caught up to Tell and Dorinda. They'd found a little spring but had to clear out fast. Tell had shot one man and rode down another with his horse. They rode out into the desert as fast as their horses could carry them. Kevin was enjoying this. When Maggie turned the page, she asked him if he was comfortable. "Of course," he answered. "Are you?" "Yeah, I can get used to this. The girls are wondering what we're doing," Maggie said, looking over at them. The twins both got up and came over to them. "What are you doing?" Stacy asked. "Just reading," Maggie said. They looked at their parents, confused. "Your father and I used to read a lot to each other," Maggie explained. "We never saw you," Trudy said. "It was a long time ago. Now it's something we want to do again," Maggie continued. Holding the Mojave Crossing book up, Maggie told them, "We're pretty sure both of your grandfathers read this book. It's a Western. They both used to read a lot of Westerns, especially by this author." Maggie and Kevin had read to the twins since they were babies. They tried to do it with the 4 of them, but sometimes Kevin had late meetings, and it would be just Maggie and the girls. It had started with baby books with pictures, then children's books and animal stories. Maggie had recently introduced them to the Nancy Drew series, which had been written for girls. They were enjoying them and reading them on their own. When Junior came along, he was also part of it. but he wasn't interested in books and always fell asleep. "Do you want to listen too?" Maggie asked. Both girls nodded and sat down on a couple of rocks. Maggie continued reading. When she finished chapter 3, she handed Kevin the book. "Your turn," she told him. "Do you like it?" Maggie asked the girls. The twins nodded their heads. Kevin picked up where Tell had found water and was going back to look for the woman and his gold. Then Tell met up with a group of horse thieves and was fed and given a horse. He made it to Los Angeles and began his search for Dorinda and his gold. He continued reading to the end of chapter 4. "We should stop and go for a swim before we have dinner," Kevin announced. Maggie and the girls agreed. They stood up and returned to where Junior and Matt were playing with their cars and trucks. Junior wanted to continue playing and didn't want to swim. "We'd better not then," Maggie said. "We'll watch these two," Trudy offered. Kevin and Maggie looked at each other smiling. "Okay, thank you, we won't be long," Maggie told them. They joined hands and walked into the water. Wading in until the water rose above their knees, they dived. They swam around the area, then across to the rocks and climbed out. They sat down with water dripping off of them, shook their heads and wiped their faces with their hands. Looking across at the kids, they waved and the twins waved back. "The water feels good," Maggie said. "It sure does," Kevin agreed. After a few minutes he asked, "How much food do we have left?" "Enough for a couple of meals," Maggie answered. "What are you thinking?" "Why don't we stay here tomorrow?" Kevin suggested. "We're leaving Saturday. Tomorrow's our last day." "If our fishermen could catch some breakfast, I think we would have enough for sure," Maggie teased. "I was going to take Junior upriver in the morning," Kevin tells her. "Maybe we could just stay here. There are plenty of pools around where there's bound to be a few trout." "I think the kids will be okay with that," Maggie agreed, "especially since Junior has a buddy." "This is a nice spot," Kevin observed. "The water's calm and there's not too many people." They sat and relaxed for another 10 minutes, talking and watching their children, then dived in the water and swam back across the river. They gathered their things, Matt went back to his family, and the 5 of them walked back to camp. Junior and Kevin returned for a second trip to collect the rest of their stuff. End of Part 5.